you do have the internal capability. But if you don't have that in a site, or if there's a burning platform that needs to be addressed quickly, I think it can be helpful to bring in a consultant to kind of give that some turbocharge.
If you are going to bring consultants without any way to upskill your own folks, then you can't just say, oh, yeah, we're going to train the practitioner, he's going to train everybody. That doesn't work.
We don't start with picking out the tool that we're going to use, right? What is the problem that we're trying to solve first? And then you jump to what is the right tool to help you do that. But I think one of the benefits of AI is it can help you determine what the right tool is itself.
Business AI audits. And we take an approach of identifying your constraints, your bottlenecks in any process you have, map it out and focus on one of these processes and brainstorm together using AI as part of the brainstorming. Hey, hey! This podcast provides lessons learned and perspectives from operational excellence consultants, coaches, and leaders on their journey on how to grow their careers and grow their own agency practice, and also to incorporate AI into their processes and those of their clients. So I'm really happy to have a special guest today. We're going to talk about why operational excellence sticks in some cultures and not in others, and what that can teach us about AI and other big changes. Jess Orr is joining us today. She worked at Toyota. She was an OpEx practitioner at the same company I worked at. Corporate OpEx leader, VP of operations. And so we have a shared background at a previous company and kind of a parallel career transition. So welcome, Jess. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. It's such a pleasure to be on your podcast. So yeah, just a little background. You covered it very well. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I went to Virginia Tech. Started off as a manufacturing engineer at a sealing company. Did that for a few years. I had the opportunity to get my Six Sigma black belt while I was there. And that's kind of what hooked me on continuous improvement, if you will. So I thought, I'd love to do this full time. And I worked in Lexington, Kentucky, and there's a large manufacturing plant with Toyota there in that area. So I had the opportunity to work there as a contractor, and I took advantage of that. So it is really a world-class company, I had heard, when it came to all things continuous improvement. And they definitely delivered on that. And it was an amazing experience working there. I felt that I fit right into the culture. I loved the principles that they had of Kaizen, continuous improvement, and respect for people. And I saw those principles were demonstrated in how that company did business and how it treated its employees. So really had a formative impact on me. My life circumstances changed and I had to find another job. So I joined a very large paper and packaging company as a full-time OpEx practitioner, like Antonio mentioned. And that really was, and we'll talk more about this in the podcast, that was a very different experience than working at Toyota because they were earlier on their continuous improvement journey. So I really found myself having to adapt from working in a culture that was very mature when it came to Kaizen and continuous improvement to one that was less mature and earlier in that process. Definitely learned a lot of lessons, both through failures and successes, and excited to share some of those with everyone today. Right now, on a bit of a sabbatical from my previous role. So I'm actually working on a book, which is about helping new leaders transition into roles at new companies, how to start off on the right foot. But again, it's great to be here today with you, Antonio.
Oh, it's great to have you, Jess. Thank you so much for joining us. And, we kind of had some parallels, a previous work experience. We didn't work together, that close. You were in a different division. You were later in corporate while I was on a different division. But we got to see kind of a similar transformation of the company. And to tie it back into a little bit of the AI, because we're talking about operational excellence, there's so many things that are coming now with artificial intelligence. I don't see it as a separate thing than operational excellence. It's just another wave of tools and transformation that needs to fit inside of a company and a culture, and leadership needs to own it. So we've been wrestling with that for years in operational excellence. So I think this can help people going through that journey of artificial intelligence kind of learn some of those lessons from driving transformation in a large corporation. So we're really happy to have you with us, Jess, again. Thank you so much. Why don't we start first kind of with your earlier career before you mentioned you worked at Toyota. Tell us about your experience there working for one of the most probably the most famous lean organization, right? That's where lean came from. They probably don't like it that we call it lean. But yeah, tell us about what it was like working there and what your experience was.
Yeah, I remember the first time I took a tour of the facility, and it was like a well choreographed kind of operation. I mean, everybody was working in sync. The line was flowing. I saw the line stop, the production line stop a few times when an operator would pull a cord called an andon, and that meant that there was an issue on the line. There was a problem that needed to be solved or addressed, and that cord went off several times during the tour, and no one was panicking. It was just that let's go figure out what the problem is and let's solve it. And that was symbolic of the entire culture there at Toyota. The way that they saw problems was so interesting. I mean, I remember how they described a problem to me. They defined it. They said, we've got our ideal state, right, which is perfection. And we've got our current state, which is not perfection, where we're at right now. And they said a problem is simply the gap between the current state and the future state. So what do we need to do to close that gap? And really that was just the theme that wove throughout the entire culture of Toyota, was this relentless drive for how can we make things better? And there were kind of two types of ways of making things better. So one was, if there was a problem, we needed to solve the problem, and that was an opportunity to get better. But it was also the concept of Kaizen, which was let's figure out how we can make something small a little bit better every day. And we didn't have full-time operational excellence or continuous improvement or belts at Toyota. It was really embedded in the mindset that everyone's job was to make their work better. So you saw everyone from the frontline associates all the way through senior leadership. I mean, I would say they were obsessed with this idea. They called
Yeah.
it the pursuit of perfection. So that really made an impression on me when I was at Toyota.
Excellent. Yeah, and then you kind of think about it as like transformation. They were already kind of that stage where they already went through a transformation, or they didn't need to go through a transformation, right? They were more in an advanced stage where they're kind of chasing what's the next level of improvement, right?
Exactly.
Excellent. So you mentioned you transitioned then for personal reasons. You joined the packaging company that we both worked at. Tell us about your experience moving on to a different company. What was your first impressions? What are the first challenges that you noticed?
Yeah. So, wow. I mean, it was a culture shock for me. And
Really?
like I mentioned before, I mean, they were probably 10 years into their continuous improvement journey versus Toyota. Like you mentioned, it was a very mature system with decades of experience. I remember one of the most interesting things I found within the first few weeks of the job. I had walked up to an operator on a machine, and I was just trying to understand his process. This was a new industry for me. And I asked him, I said, do you have standard work? Where is it? And he looks at me like, what are you talking about? I said, well, how do you know how to do your job? And he said, well, someone showed me how to do it. The guy who used to run this machine. And I was like, what? There's no standard work. So I was like, okay. That was a shock. There was also just, I mentioned at Toyota, there's this kind of everybody was involved in continuous improvement all the time. I saw kind of a sense of complacency or acceptance of the status quo at the new company, where people didn't have that inert drive to want to make things better. And it wasn't to say that in a negative way about the people there. It's just they weren't incentivized to do that, right? Leadership wasn't asking them to do that. I also noticed that there was a lot of hiding problems. So at Toyota, we celebrated problems almost. They were opportunities to improve, versus at the new company where I saw people, trying to hide problems or trying to solve them themselves. They were just kind of accepted that, problems are just kind of part of the process. So those are some of the key takeaways for me. It was like, wow, it was a huge culture shock. The difference between the system that I took for granted at Toyota to some extent versus, understanding the current state of an organization that was much earlier on the continuous improvement journey.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting, and I can relate. I was in an automotive supplier, and it was not Toyota, right? By any means, but there was a lot of things that were more advanced just because it was part of the automotive industry as a supplier of automotive. But the culture was something that we didn't have that culture of continuous improvement and a positive mindset to improve and that leadership support around it. So when I moved to the packaging company, I had a similar view on kind of the maturity level of the organization, but and maybe it was because I was in a different division than you were in, where they were more advanced in their operational excellence journey and the leadership foundations. But I did find that a culture where leaders wanted to improve. Maybe they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the knowledge. Some of them did, were more advanced in the journey, and there were still, a lot of opportunities to improve, but they were on traction. They were moving forward. So maybe a little bit different on on uh, on the maturity level where the division that I joined, but definitely you can see kind of different organizations are going to be in a different maturity level.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I think, yeah, I saw that in the division that you were in as well. And I wonder, curious your thoughts on this, because I think the division that you were in, there was a lot of leadership buy-in. Like they were aligned on the what, they weren't always certain on the how to improve, versus the one that I was in, where they had started with, instead of like building the leadership buy-in and the why behind it, they started with just deploying tools. Like, we're going to do
Hmm.
5S,
Yeah.
right? And they kind of,
Yeah.
that really wasn't the tools before the culture, is an approach I find just doesn't work very well. You've got to build kind of that foundational framework first. I mean, does that resonate with you?
Exactly. You're exactly right. And that's the first thing I noticed is they had the leadership culture. They treated
Mm,
you well. They cared about your well-being, relationships. They had goals that they were striving for. They're taking care of their employees. They had objectives, and it started with leadership development.
mm,
Whereas it's funny to say, because at the previous company, it was kind of the same failure of we were doing tools, tools, tools without the leadership culture to sustain it. So we also had trouble, even though it was more advanced, we had trouble to sustain any further improvements. So it just speaks to the importance of having that foundational culture before starting a transformation. That definitely is something that some companies, if you go straight to the tools, I don't know, see how that could ever work. I don't know if you agree with that.
yeah. No, I do. I think people gravitate towards the tools because, like, there's a process. Like, I'm going to run a Kaizen event, and here's the tools that we're going to deploy. Like, it's relatively straightforward. Whereas culture, it's hard to wrap your arms around. Like, where do we get started with culture? So I think people tend to gravitate towards tools because they perceive them as being an easier way to get
Easier.
started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thought. But then uh, you never address the culture.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people say we'll do the tools, and by putting the tools in place, the culture will change.
Yeah.
In a way,
Doesn't
it
work like that.
will, but not right. You have some
Yeah,
the level of foundational leadership skills. I'm gonna call it, if you can call
exactly.
it that. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting that we kind of share that experience in a different way, but some common things to learn from. I'm curious, when you went to, you were in that division. Tell us about your move to the centralized team. What was your role there, and what was your motivation to move on to that role?
Yeah, so I mean, I was in the division that I started with for about 3 to 4 years. And eventually I became the master black belt for that division. I was responsible for all the continuous improvement initiatives. And we got through COVID together. That was tough. But we really got to a place where I felt like the division was in good hands. I had a really strong team of practitioners. It was a relatively well-oiled engine that kept going. So I wanted a new challenge. I said, I think I could lead this and feel good about the work that we've done here. And so the person who is going to become my manager approached me about this role with the centralized corporate operational excellence team. And I said, that sounds like a great challenge and a way to have an even bigger impact across the company. So that's really what motivated me to join the corporate team. And my role there was an operational excellence director. So I was really responsible for building the systems and the processes and the tools that would equip the manufacturing sites. There's about 300 of them to deploy, continuous improvement and continue building their cultures and improving their operations. So it was more of a system-wide type of role.
Right, right. Very good. So what did you see moving on to that role as the way that we collaborated between the divisional OpEx resources and the central team. And maybe we need to give a little background to that to our audience here, because we used to be one centralized group in the beginning when I first joined, and then we got decentralized. A lot of the resources went to the each of the divisions, but we still had a central team, right? How did you see that relationship between the centralized team and the team that worked inside of the division?
Yeah, I would say when I started, the relationship was a little tense. I think there was a perception that was grounded in reality that the corporate team would tell the divisional teams what to do and how to do it, and they were expected to roll it out without asking any questions. So really the approach I started with is I realized, the people who are closest to the operations or closest to the processes are going to have the best firsthand knowledge of what the gaps are and what we need to do to improve. So we formed what we call the Continuous Improvement Council. I think your manager was on that council. That really had representation from all of the divisions, and we would meet regularly and talk about the opportunities and how we might want to address them. I think an example of something that we did that really showed great teamwork between the central and the divisional teams was the development of a constraint analysis tool. So, when you're trying to improve throughput in a site, you always want to identify, which machine center is the constraint, and then you focus on improving throughput through the constraint, which helps improve it through the entire system. And, there was a lot of different types of equipment, different types of sites. So it was relatively complex to kind of build a standardized tool that could be adapted for every site. And I remember I worked closely with a divisional practitioner, and we developed the tool together, and we tested it out in his site. That was a site within the division that you worked in. The tool worked pretty well. So then I worked with another practitioner in a different division that's different types of equipment. Said, okay, how do we need to adapt this tool so that it works well in your division as well? And kind of built a hybrid tool based on all the input that we got. And when it rolled out, I think it was relatively successful because we had tested it. We had gotten input from the sites before we built the tool. But really, our motivation behind the tool was, we want to make this easier and less frustrating for people to be able to develop, to identify what the constraint is in the site. So I think that's an example of how it could work well, but it's got to be partnership, right? It can't be corporate telling the divisions what to do. It can't be the divisions going rogue and doing their own thing. So it's really kind of a blend of both.
Very good, very good. And yeah, and I was on the other side, right? And I did see, collaboration with those tools that you mentioned. And there were some good things that came out, but I did feel, to be honest with you, sometimes we were not heard, or
Yeah.
I feel like our division, at least, we merged between different divisions, right? But the subdivision that we were in, and we had been doing operational excellence to a next level for longer than other divisions, that we didn't, that kind of got put to the side, and we felt like we were not being listened to because, don't do this, do that. I'm trying to understand, like, how does that happen in an organization? Is it because, I don't know, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I think, we learned from like the successes, like the example I gave, but there were some failures too. And I think we saw one. I'll see if this resonates with you as well, but with the daily management system rollout that we developed. So your division, which I believe was acquired, and that was part of the challenge too, was how do you integrate an acquisition? But your division was more advanced when it came to daily management systems. So we developed this, enterprise-wide standard approach all the way down to, pre-printed DMS boards, right, that every site was
Yeah.
supposed to use. But your division had sites that were doing daily management system effectively, and it didn't look like what the corporate template was, but it was working. And yet we kind of force fed this model that worked in divisions that were less mature with DMS, but didn't necessarily have the same benefit to divisions like yours that were more mature. So I think you've got to take a really nuanced approach and say, okay, so, on a spectrum, right, you've got sites that are less mature, in the middle, more mature. How do we either create a standard approach that can accommodate for all of that by variation, or create an approach where you can pick tools and adapt them to where you are on the journey too. I think that was an example of something that didn't go very well. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
Yeah, I do agree. And there was other things too, but I guess it's hard to be in a central group when you have divisions doing their own thing,
Yeah.
right? And you're trying to incorporate everybody's ideas into a common vision, if you will, right? I don't know. I'm just wondering.
I guess it goes back to like, why did we have to have a daily management system that was identical across all the sites? And I think, yeah, there was a benefit to being a senior leader and you could go into any site and recognize the DMS instantly, all the components of it, because it all looks the same for all the other sites. But does that benefit outweigh, taking away that ownership from people of creating something themselves? And that's a question you've got
Yeah,
to answer.
right. And I think that was, and I think it goes back to the things we were talking about, leadership and leadership styles, where that was just one minor thing that I think in relationship to we saw other leadership behaviors where it's more telling what to do
Yeah.
in a way that some of these more advanced divisions and sites didn't like to be told what to do. So I feel like that's part of the it wasn't just one example, but I think it was more of a leadership behavior that we saw kind of creep in through the years. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
kind of a theory behind it, if you
Yeah.
will. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit. We talked about kind of the central group and that perspective of working together. The other thing we had is experience with consultants, right? We had consultants when we first started with at least in the division. They had been in there for 5 years before when they started working with us. They did transformations in waves. We did see a big benefit of it, but then we also saw that things didn't sustain after the consultants left. They didn't develop the capabilities around it. I want to kind of get your perspective on it, being on the different division or being also on the centralized team, about when do you need consultants, what was our experience getting consultants, and kind of your perspectives on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've thought about this a lot because in the division that I was the master black belt for, we had the same consultants so that we hadn't had them as long as you had in your division. I think it's a couple things. So when do you need a consultant? I think when you have a gap in your internal capability. So if you've got, a full-time continuous improvement manager at a site who knows what good looks like, knows what it takes to get there, I don't know that you necessarily need a consultant to help with a site like that because you do have the internal capability. But if you don't have that in a site, or if there's a burning platform that needs to be addressed quickly, I think it can be helpful to bring in a consultant to kind of give that some turbocharge in the beginning. But I think that you've got to kind of start with the end in mind. So you don't want that consultant to be there forever, right? So how do you build a framework so that you're able to sustain after the consultant leaves? And the best approach that I saw was to pair the consultant with an internal champion, where the consultant's number one role is not actually tactically deploying the system as much as it is coaching and mentoring that internal champion who's going to be the person who sustains it after the consultant leaves. So we did that in my division. So every consultant was paired with an operational excellence practitioner reported to me. And really, we focused on developing our practitioners to the point where after a couple of years, I
We
kicked
did the
out the
same thing.
consultant. I think they came back like once a year or so and did like an assessment to kind of see where we are or where we were. As soon as I could get rid of them, as soon as I could exit them out, I did because I wanted my internal people to be leading it.
And you want your internal people to develop the capabilities, because that's something
Yeah.
else we saw, that even though the first couple of years we did have a transformation and we did have impact, we didn't really have ways to maintain that. Although we had trained practitioners who were capable, when someone exited the company or got promoted and there was no backup system to train and upskill the next person to take that CI leader role, for example, right? So, but there's not just one role, there's multiple roles out there, and we didn't have a way to upskill them. So that's another thing is, if you are going to bring consultants without any way to upskill your own folks, you can't just say, oh yeah, we're going to train the practitioner, he's going to train everybody. That doesn't work. At least in our experience, you can't be the only person who is the master at everything. You need to develop the capabilities with the right people and have systems to train and develop those experts within those areas of expertise. And it can't be one person. I don't know if you agree or had a similar experience or different experience.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, you've got your consultant or you don't have a consultant, but at minimum, you've got those full-time CI practitioners, and their number one job really needs to be embedding the CI capability within the people at the site. So one of the things I like that we did is that we had pillar leaders, and we had your 5S pillar, your preventative maintenance pillar, and those were led by associates at the site. And the practitioner was really focused on coaching and developing those people. So with the ultimate goal of, you don't need the practitioner anymore, right? It's a pretty much a self-sustaining site, but that requires, building that capability within the people at the site.
Absolutely. Completely agree. It just took longer.
Yeah, it did. It does take long. It's not easy, and I think that's why some people skip that, right? Because that's part of building the culture.
Right, and which is kind of what I was referring, to when we were discussing about things that we stopped doing, that we thought it was the best practice, and we felt like kind of got to the side.
Maybe the question is, was it the best practice in some
Yeah,
cases?
yeah.
If it got thrown to the side, or I think it's one of those. It's the problem, right, to be solved in terms of what were the root causes behind why that didn't sustain or take hold, and then addressing those, which could mean that it wasn't the best practice, or the way that it was deployed didn't work, or it didn't have a way to sustain.
Well, the only reason I said it was the best practice is because I got to see both. I got to
Mm,
see the the sites that had gone through the transformation, the site that hadn't gone through the transformation. I'm very analytical, and I got to see the numbers of those sites. The numbers didn't lie. It was night and day, the performance in those sites of transformation and how effective it was. And then looking outside as well and looking at competitors in the industry, and you get to see what's working in operational excellence. And what I saw in other companies is that model was the only one that gave long-term sustained results.
mm,
So yeah, but you're right, it's like within the organization is, how does the entire organization figure if that's the best practice or not?
yeah.
How does an organization do that?
I wonder if it comes down to leadership too. Like, I know that the sites that tended to do very well, the general manager would just say, this is how we're going to do 5S, right? And we're going to maintain it no matter what. It's going to be a daily discipline. So I wonder if, and again, it kind of depends on the root cause behind why something didn't work, a best practice. But I think at minimum, a prerequisite for it is you have to have a general manager who says, this is the way that we're going to do things.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. But also, what worked in that division was that every site had a similar model. It wasn't perfect, but everybody was kind of bought into to that model.
Yeah. Yeah, they were.
And then you can, people from a different site can help someone else from a different site because they can speak the same language and things of that nature.
Yeah, there was a
That was
lot
hard
of
to do.
sharing among sites. Well, I noticed that in your division too. Like there was a healthy competitiveness, but also willingness to share. Like, come see our site. We'll show you how we're doing it this way, or we'll send someone to your site to help you with this too. So yeah, that's a good point.
Absolutely. Right. Well, moving forward into, I think we were talking about a little more methodologies, right? So, what are the trends you see now with operational excellence and into the future? What are the current things that you think are going to change operational excellence?
Well, I think you touched on it at the beginning of this podcast, but it's definitely AI, right? That's it's all the rage and for good reason. Yeah, I think when we think about continuous improvement, those of us who do it full time or practitioners, like that applies to ourselves as well. And how are we going to improve the way that we approach operational excellence? And I see AI as a huge enabler of that. And I'd actually love to hear some of your thoughts on the how of that. But I mean, I even see I've used LLMs like, Gemini or ChatGPT, and I'll give it the kind of the framework of the situation that I'm in, right? Here's the problem that I'm trying to solve. Can you help me brainstorm the best approach to addressing this? And the more context, the more information you give it, the better of an answer it can give you that can really just give you some guidance on where to focus first. And also it can pull examples from other companies of, like you mentioned, best practices, things that are universal truths that you want to apply. I think it can do a lot of the heavy lifting, which can really accelerate the time from when you're starting a project or an initiative to when you're starting to reap the benefits of it. But I would say that's one of the biggest trends I'm seeing is how do we effectively integrate AI, not just as a tool, but as an enabler and accelerator of continuous improvement efforts. What are your thoughts on AI as it relates to continuous improvement? Is that, where do you see that being the most powerful way to leverage CI efforts?
I think to me, AI is another tool that applies to anybody, right? Just like continuous improvement, we want everybody to work on making improvements in their own work to improve their process to get better. I think AI should be the same. Everybody should use the tools that they have available to them to make their work better, like the example you mentioned. And that is across the board. Depending on the situation, you might be able to use it in a different way. Those are just a couple of examples, but there's so many tools out there that are available or that with some automation that is not, extremely complicated to make can automate processes, can make processes better, especially on the administrative side of things. Us as operational excellence, we're so focused on the operations side that we kind of lost track a little bit, in my opinion, on the transactional side of the business, on the commercial side. There's so many opportunities in all these other areas of the organization that AI can help with extreme improvements you can make in organizations, right? But I don't think it's one solution. I think the experts in those areas need to learn those as well. But I think that's where operational excellence can help kind of make the connection of what tools are available out there and kind of drive the opportunities identification of where you could use AI to improve processes. And everybody should be just getting their feet wet and learning what's out there because and kind of lose fear of it. Now, that's the other question is it depends sometimes on the size of the organization. Larger companies are a little more reluctant to try things because of risks, things of that nature, but they need to also learn how to prevent those risks like anything else, right? I think they'll be a little slower to adopt some of these things where smaller and medium-sized companies are more prone to experimenting, if you will, and also not waiting for corporate to say, yeah, we can do this, or the IT folks to say, hey, yeah, we're going to drive this initiative. Because sometimes I feel like that can also slow companies down. So um, to me, it's kind of been an evolution of some of the operational excellence folks collaborating with some of the more technical experts or even outside consultants that I mentioned, where you can't just learn all this stuff that's out there. It's changing so fast, so quickly that that's an opportunity for them to partner up and say, hey, we have some opportunities, teach us where this could be applicable to our environment. Let's take some baby steps. Well, here we have this opportunity here. What tools are there available for us to use? Not just an LLM, but these other automation tools that can be implemented that are not going to be huge cost to organizations, and that they're gonna make a huge impact. Now, the other tangent that I see also is us as CI and OpEx professionals have always had the cultural side of things in our minds, right? How to make people adopt new ways of working. we're good at that, right? So we can leverage that with others to drive that change, but also doing it in a responsible way, because we all are also have been very cautious to not make improvements with the purpose of letting people go, right? We want to be able to have a plan for the future, to know what our capacity is, to have a plan to grow so that you're not having to lay people off because you made improvements. We have that with, productivity improvements and machinery, right? And operations side. The same applies to people, right? AI is going to have an impact, I believe, on a lot of different, roles. But if we do it in a smart way and developing people and get them excited about it, that they can develop themselves and to the next level in their careers, they will be more open to try it out and use it. And organizations that will succeed are the ones that want to grow and that want to drive the cultural change. So I think organizations that want to use AI for short-term gain, or they're gonna kill their culture, and they're gonna lose their people, and they're gonna have a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, two things to build on from what you said. I mean, I think the first thing we usually say, the fastest way to shut down a CI effort is to eliminate jobs because of improvements that you made. Like, why would anyone want to be involved in a continuous
Right.
improvement project if they thought their job was going to be at risk? And I think that's got to be the strategy with AI as well, is that there needs to be psychological safety, and people don't feel like this is going to eliminate their jobs, right? At Toyota, we would often make improvements that would reduce the need for a headcount in a specific operation. We never laid anyone off because of that. We would repurpose them, we would find a different role for them. And I think the same thing applies to improvements, efficiencies gained through AI. The other thing that you're mentioning that I'm thinking of is, like, if you wanted to hire an operational excellence practitioner who is an expert on AI, you're going to have a really hard time finding that person, just because AI is relatively new in terms of the ways that we're using it now. So I think this is an example of where you would want to really consider partnering with a consultant, organization like your business, to help you, to know even where to get started on it, to build that capability within your people, send them to training, right? I think that's an investment that's going to pay dividends as we're all discovering the power of AI, what it can do for us.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's where you hear a lot of now of organizations not getting the ROI for their AI pilot programs, right? But then you look at the details of it, and it's because they're just trying to use AI instead
Mhm.
of looking at your problems, where are your opportunities, and first focusing on that. And then from that, what tools can help me solve my problems instead of the other way around, right? So I think that's where us as CI and OpEx experts, we know how to facilitate that, right? We've done it in analyzing processes. We've done it with value stream mapping, with process mapping. We can use those skills to do those kind of assessment and analysis, to partner up with someone who knows. I think I agree with you, is you're not gonna have all the knowledge out there, and but I think that's where the connection will be really strong, to partner up and them to identify where the opportunities are, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point, because I think we've got to consider AI as a very powerful tool in the toolkit. And just like with any other continuous improvement initiative, we don't start with picking out the tool that we're going to use, right? We start with understanding, like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve first, and then you jump to what is the right tool to help you do that. But I think one of the benefits of AI as well, is it can help you determine what the right tool is itself. So it's
That's
like your Swiss
exactly.
Army knife. You
Yep.
can do a lot of different things.
That's exactly right. And not to no shameless plug here, but we're actually developing a process to do business AI audits. And we take an approach of identifying your constraints, your bottlenecks, and any process you have. And then we get that input, map it out, and focus on one of these processes and brainstorm together with a group, and using AI as part of this brainstorming of what tools are available. But then you also need that expert to validate that and help guide the conversations, because AI will not tell you exactly the solutions. There's multiple choices, right? Some of them, it might be gathering the wrong information. Sometimes it does make mistakes, but it's a great brainstorming tool that can quickly help you guide the conversation with the team to identify those opportunities, and then also give you an analysis of the ROI. So we build that into our analysis of an AI business audit. Okay, these are the top opportunities, and it's a conversation with the team, right? Are these that make sense? Make sense? No, we can't do this. It doesn't apply here. Okay, which one do we choose? Or let's not focus on that. Let's focus on this other solution over here. And then you ask it to give you an ROI. If you have multiple solutions of each one, and it'll give you kind of a starting point. And then you validate the numbers with it, and then you go and try the top option. So very similar to what we do in operational excellence, and using AI to your point of to help you with that as well.
What a great way just by going through that process to help build that capability within the people who are operational excellence practitioners or whoever's, the kind of the internal champion, right? By watching you do it too when you're facilitating, and they're learning in real time how to leverage AI. So I think there's a secondary benefit there too, but that's super cool.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, and we're happy to show it to everybody. We do demos of for consultants as well. We do takes us 45 minutes roughly to an hour to do a demo, where we focus on one process and we identify an opportunity in their process. So we're happy to do that with any consultant or coach out there as well.
I'll tell you, when I'm ready to find my next role, Antonio, I'm going to be giving you a call because I want that
Yeah,
demo.
absolutely, absolutely. I'd be happy to do it with you. Kind of takes us to our next topics that we wanted to cover. I do want to ask you about your future endeavors. Just give us a hint of what you're working on, what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so I'm taking this next few months or so, not working in a full-time job, but working on my book. I've also got some personal things that I'm working on as well. Working on adopting a couple of kids, so going to learn how to be a mom for a few months. But I think my next role, I was vice president of a business unit prior to taking my sabbatical, and while I enjoyed that, I was responsible for all the functional areas of the business. My passion really is operational excellence. I love it. So I could imagine, leading, operational excellence at a, small to mid-sized company potentially is my next step. So it's important. I look for two things in a role is, what am I passionate about? Where can I make an impact? And where I find the intersection of those two criteria, that's where I go. So I'm excited for what's next.
Excellent. That sounds so exciting, and congratulations what you're planning to do on a personal note. Yeah, I wish you the best. Are you thinking about doing any AI within that?
So AI has been absolutely instrumental to me in terms of developing my book. So it's not written the book for me, to be very clear, but it helps me with kind of, drafting concepts and outlines. I will use an LLM for this mostly, but really helping to check my thought process and also to generate ideas. And it gives me like the perspective of someone who's actually consuming the material I'm creating. Like, is this what they need? Is this value added? Asking it about what some best practices are, that sort of thing. So I'm also taking advantage of this time to really step up my AI game and learn how to use it more effectively.
Excellent. That's awesome. I have one more question that I thought about as we were talking about this, because you have the experience both in being a leader of a division and also being on the operational excellence side of things, and it maybe relate to what you're planning to do with your book. But if you were to give advice to an ops leader, whether they're trying to implement or launch an operational excellence program or an AI initiative, right? Which we talked about, there's tangents there. And they feel like stuck. What is the one thing that they should do or they should focus on to start getting unstuck?
I think the thing I always go back to is the concept they taught us at Toyota called Genchi Genbutsu, which means go and see, right? And I think it's just wherever you feel like you're getting stuck or where that bottleneck is, take some time to just reset and go in with fresh eyes and try to understand what the current state is. Because some of your assumptions may be incorrect. Things may have changed. You may think you've got your arms around the problem, but you're missing something. So I think that's the first step, is to really go in, understand the current state, challenge yourself, challenge your assumptions. I know there were times when I was starting out as an operational excellence practitioner when things just were not working, or we were not moving the needle. And I really had to take a step back and not just understand the external process and what was happening, but also internally. Is there something I need to be doing differently in order to connect with people, or in order to shift the culture and to move things in a positive direction? So I really would just encourage them, take that step back, really try to take a holistic view, look both externally as well as within, and say, obviously what we're doing is not working. So, what do we need to try differently would be my advice.
Excellent advice, Jess. Really appreciate that. I'm sure people listening will take that definitely to heart. Yeah, I want to thank you, Jess. We had an amazing conversation. It was really great to hear your thoughts on a lot of these topics, and shared experiences we had. We had different perspectives on things. That happens, right? It happens in organizations where you come from different places, you see different things from a different perspective, and it's all great to learn. It was really great to hear from you, and what you're doing and the next steps in your career. Wish you the best. And yeah, if you want to share with our audience, if they want to get in touch with you or be on the lookout for your next endeavors or your book out there, how can they find you?
Yeah, probably the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. Just search for Jess Orr, and I should come up in the search results. So I'm happy to always make new connections and meet new people. So that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. I often will share posts from my blog via LinkedIn as well. I try to post there pretty regularly about different leadership topics. So it's the best way to reach me. But Antonio, we've worked in the same company for a little while. I've always admired you, appreciated your approach to operational excellence. I think we're very much aligned on the principles and our motivations for it. And I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've learned a lot from you too. So thank you.
Thank you, Jess. I appreciate that. I really admire you too. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks to our listeners. Great conversation with Jess. And think about all the lessons learned from operational excellence. Now that we have consultants and coaches and leaders all thinking about artificial intelligence, all these lessons learned, tap into those as well, so that your AI initiative will also succeed. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in the next one.